All right. So, KK, you want to tell us a little bit about yourself?
Would love to. Thank you, Jim. My name is Christina Kapp, but I go by KK. And I have a non-for-profit called the Belief Factory, and it really just cuts to the core of the empowerment of the human-to-human connection and really empowering those voices of those shared experiences, and really to cultivate that deeper, different connection within the community, whether it be virtual or in your backyard. And so, with that being said, that is where I got very, um, I felt the great need to advocate and really elevate the information and knowledge about the P&A system and of PAMI councils. So it's an honor that Jim kind of took up some of this, let's say, advocacy mission, and we decided to do a PAMI empowerment project. So that is one of my initiatives under the Belief Factory. So thank you very much, Jim.
So I'm going to get you in trouble because KK was
Okay.
recently told not to tell people that she's on the PAMI, the Ohio PAMI Council and Advisory Council. And in fact, she's the chair, although she's, I think, rolling off in, uh, I think, January. And yeah, KK, and a couple other people really turned me on to the Protection and Advocacy for Individuals with Mental Illness Act, the PAMI Act. And when I started looking into it, I saw a huge opportunity. And the problem is that the protection and advocacy agencies, you can phrase it different ways, but have not really embraced protecting, well, let's say embrace the mental illness part of their mandate. They started out with the developmentally disabled and other physical handicaps, and that's really kind of where I think they're most comfortable. And so they've just kind of, I think, suppressed what the PAMI advisory councils and the Psych Rights PAMI Advisory Council Empowerment Mission is to basically get the advisory councils to exercise their authority. And to set the stage for that, I, with Dr. Peter Gertrude, one of the most prominent medical researchers in the world, and David Cohen, who I think a lot of people know, Chuck Ruby, who's the executive director of the International Society for Ethical Psychology and Psychiatry, and Faith Myers, who was the winner of the famous Faith Myers versus Alaska Psychiatric Institute appeal. We wrote this report on improving mental health outcomes, and I like to think, with no humility at all, that it really should be the guidepost for, could be the guidepost for a lot of advocacy, because it's it's just completely referenced, and it shows that psychiatric incarceration is massively associated with suicide. So the idea that you're going to involuntarily commit someone to stop them from committing suicide is just fallacious. The drugs increase harm to self and others. And anyway, I try not to read all the slides, but anyway, they dramatically reduce lifespans and recovery, and there are other alternatives. So there's a link there at psychrights.org. And I don't have the chat up, but I think Lee is going to put in the chat that there's a link to this PowerPoint. So anyway, I think it's both a good resource for lots of advocacy, and also really feeds into this PAMI issue, protection of well of people's rights. So basically, I think people know that involuntary commitment is only allowed if people are a danger to themselves or others. And that has to be pretty serious. And one of the things that is not so often recognized, that it has to be done according to proper procedures and evidentiary standards. And basically the court cases are shams or a kangaroo court. Okay, so and then for forced drugging, the different states have different formulations, but my view is under the U.S. Constitution, and according to this Cell versus United States case, that you can only drug someone against their will if you can prove it's in their best interest and there's no less intrusive alternatives. And the reason why it's not completely clear that that's required in the civil context is because this case was in the drug someone to make them competent to stand trial case. But anyway, I think that that is the rule, and these are the rules for drugging someone against their will. So what this means, what these legal requirements mean, is that no more than 10% of people that are psychiatrically incarcerated actually meet commitment criteria. I mean, they've got to be proven by clear and convincing evidence that they're a danger of serious harm to themselves or others. And the literature is very clear that psychiatrists cannot predict dangerousness or even harm to self or others. And okay, well, and okay, and so you've got all these people locked up against their will that that hasn't been done properly. And it's been done pursuant to these kangaroo courts, where oftentimes these hearings last no more than 5 minutes or 15 minutes, and the lawyers appointed to represent people at best do nothing on their behalf. I mean, I'm just actually in the middle of a transcript now, where the lawyer that was appointed to represent the respondent did a better case of presenting the hospital, did a better job of presenting the hospital's case than the hospital's lawyer. So, okay. And that no one can ever be properly drugged under the US Constitution because he can't legitimately prove that it's in someone's best interest and there are no less intrusive alternatives, because it's, you know, what the report just, you know, I laid out a little bit, just shows is that the drugs reduce the recovery rate from a potential 80% to 5% and reduce lives by 20 to 25 lifespans by 20 to 25 years. And there are other alternatives. So KK, you can jump in here anytime that you want to.
I absolutely going to share just real quickly personally. I have seen where these kangaroo courts take place personally. I actually was under guardianship at one point in time, and I have also seen where the P&A system, the Protection and Advocacy System, which is attached to the PAMI councils, can do the right thing and address some of these abuses, neglects, wrongful forced incarceration, psychiatric, incarcerations. And I've seen it work right. And I think the bigger scale of, we're not seeing it. We really want to empower the structures that are put there for the right reasons. And so, personally, I actually was in a facility that there was extreme abuse and neglect, and I was a youth. And they did come in and address it, and there were, cases, and the facility was temporarily shut down. And so, just it was in, the best interest of all of us and our safety. And I can tell you firsthand that that was not beneficial to anybody to be in that environment. So that's partially where a lot of this comes from, is that we know, uh, just like his outcomes measure, his report states that we can do better, that there are healthier, less intrusive, less restrictive alternatives and options, and there is a system that should be really elevating the voice of the individuals uh, for choice and for their rights. And the federally mandate of the PAMI Act kind of puts some of that in place.
Right, thanks. So this is straight from the PAMI statute. So, right at the beginning, it says the purpose is to ensure that the rights of individuals with mental illness are protected, and that including under the Constitution, U.S. Constitution, and federal and state statutes. So that's the mandate of the Protection and Advocacy agencies, P&As. Okay. So, and there's also, in order to do that, the Act establishes these PAMI advisory councils. And it's interesting. Okay, so in this section, it says the council will advise on policies and priorities to carry out in protecting and advocating the rights of individuals with mental illness. Okay, so, and then this next section talks about the advisory councils as well. And most importantly, is that what it provides is the PAMI council, advisory councils are to jointly develop the annual priorities of the system with the advisory council. So this is a key part of the advisory council's authority. In my mind, jointly means that they have to agree. The P&A and the advisory councils have to agree. And that's not what's been happening. The advisory council, the P&As just say, oh, well, thank you for your thoughts, but we're going to establish this instead. So, in my view, jointly means that the advisory councils have a veto over these annual priorities, and so does the P&A. So that essentially means it needs to be negotiated, and that's a key element of what we're trying to do, is get the advisory councils to recognize their authority, because they're not told this. Basically, they're said they're really focused on this word advisory and not on what the statute says is their actual authority. Okay, and now the regulations. So basically say the same thing, but if you notice in this one, it talks about priorities. In this one, it talks about policies and priorities. So the regulations just say priorities and policies. And also very key to this is that the regulations require that the councils provide independent advice and recommendations. And so there's been, some back and forth with the California P&A, for example, where the P&A basically said we get to appoint the council members, and SAMHSA, which runs, oversees this program, the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, said no, the P&A cannot appoint the members, because that doesn't allow it to provide independent advice. So you see the sleeping gorilla there. It says Independent PAIMI Advisory Council. And we've gotten some pushback about that because it doesn't say it's the council is independent. It says it's to provide independent advice. So I think that's kind of a semantic thing. And it also talks about working jointly. So KK, did you want to add
I do.
anything?
I want to just add that we're also to go out into the community, which within that independent advisory, that actually means that we are to host stakeholder input, which would mean, going and doing the inpatient out in reaches, which would be to the state facilities, the state institutions, along with community outreach via Zoom, get all of the voices elevated of what is really going on in the communities to bring to the P&A and say, look, you may not see this as priorities, but the community and individuals with lived experience are sharing this with us. And so that's really where I believe is a large part of the PAMI Council's power, right? Is the people power. And we are to do community education and connect those points. So it's a little bit more than what we're kind of brushing over. Perfect example is I just did have that priorities meeting for the very first time. We did it jointly with the board for the first time. So that's saying a lot. And it was a very different experience. And I can also share with you that I shared the outcomes report with the entire board and with the PAMI Council prior to us making it, and it was very helpful and beneficial. I do feel that there is a disconnect that Jim and I are really looking to empower the facilitation of the reconnection and elevation of that lived experience, feedback, input, and advice of the direction of the policies and the goals. So that's kind of how it ties together. And I can share personally that I was able to really educate, I guess, almost board members because they are sometimes unaware of the mental health element, right? What that might look like, and they were quite shocked. So we're closing some gaps with some of these, initiatives we're taking on.
So thanks, KK. That's great. I mean, your experience and overall greatness is super. So, and one of the things I just recently kind of focused on, can you see my cursor? Anyway, down here in number 3, it says submit a section of the system's annual report. So let me see if I can do this. So I just this is a hidden slide. It's not in the one that we've uploaded. So that refers to this section of the annual report describing the activities, accomplishments, and expenditures. And it says prepared by the advisory council. So the council gets to submit that, and the P&A has nothing to say about what goes into it. So that's okay. So again, the advisory councils have a lot of leverage. And I mean, the point is that there's kind of an incomprehensible amount of damage that's being done by all this psychiatric force. And you've got this whole system that's designed, that was set up to enforce people's rights. And that's where a lot of this, damage is coming from. And so let's get it to do its job. Okay. So Did you want to say something, KK, before I talk about this?
No, I just real quick, I just want to echo what Jim is saying because it feels very, very much like a education of the system that should have already known how it should be functioned in a sense, because the reality is the same oppressive, nature of situations occur where consumer voice gets silenced. And we're almost just saying, hey, let's take up what was given to us back when the PAMI Act was put in place, but let's exercise it to the fullness. And we don't need to reinvent the wheel of grassroots advocacy organization. Right here is something, if we really get them organized, like equipped, right? And see how other states are doing it successfully and what their strategies were, we really could put a dent in some of these forced treatment bills that are going across every state, state to state, along with the care court models that are going from California to New York to, so that's where I think Jim and I are really seeing how the different states enact the PAMI councils, how they're used and how they're underused or unused. Right, Jim?
Right. And what, yeah, I mean, I look at it as in largely not doing their job. Some are way better than others. In preparing for this, I went looking for the priorities of the various PAMI councils, and it was really hard. I didn't really find any that were specifically PAMI, except for this one, the Alabama Disabilities Advocacy Program. And I think it's well, I've seen lists that are like 40, lists of 40 items and things like that. But so this is the Alabama one. Okay, so the first one they list is safety from abuse and neglect. Okay, I think that's good. My question is, to what extent are is the Alabama P&A actually bringing litigation on this? I mean, I guess I should have said really at the outset that, or maybe I did, is that the PAMI Act funds an army of lawyers, and that the whole idea here is to deploy that army against the psychiatric force. Okay, so safety from abuse and neglect, I think that's good. Okay, and all these things are good. Community access, individuals with serious mental illness, seriously emotionally disturbed children and youth will have access to appropriate and individualized community-based services that will enhance their ability to live independently. Okay, that's good. But I think it really misses the whole, the larger picture and these other things: employment, alternative decision-making, education. Those are good. But really, they miss the larger picture, which is this huge amount of harm that's being done by psychiatric force through these kangaroo courts. So, KK, do you want to add anything?
I did. I just wanted to add, what would it look like if, five states or seven states, had this, agreed to kind of hit on the forced community treatment, the kangaroo, those courts, the forced drugging or the seclusion and restraint, right? Um, if we actually address those and put those as the top of our priorities, right? How different could it possibly look? It could look very different. I know that we have pushed that where I am currently, and I do know that several other states are going to be voting those in as well, along with preventions such as advanced directives. Uh, but really taking up the core root issue of the criminalization of mental health. and the actual abuse within the system, like the core issues. And so it was a little bit more difficult because it was a lot of stuff people almost didn't want to hear about. But the reality was I brought some real numbers of what it looked like. And I think it was very eye-opening. And this was a new experience for a lot of people. But I do think that there's real power in this. And I'm not going to tell you that we got all of them passed this year, but I do think next year we'll have even more of them. So I know that our list is going to look very different than, say, Alabama's, because we are going to the core of the real issue of what the PAMI Act was intended for is exactly what Jim is referring to.
Great. So, um, so then, I mean, this group ISPS is composed a lot, maybe predominantly of the people who provide mental health services. And the advisory councils have to include, and it's interesting, says a provider of mental health services, and the other ones are all plural. So I wonder if it's that only one can be on the council. So I mean, that's if you're literal about it. I mean, I guess you can fall into other categories, such as people who are knowledgeable about mental illness, and um, so the whole idea is so people in ISPS-US, I think, qualify for being on these councils. Um, I'd like to emphasize that it's a huge opportunity to make a big difference. And so anyway, and so I think it's noteworthy that 60% are have to be uh, people with lived experiences, I guess how we say it now, or family members of people with lived experience. Uh, so anyway, so that's, I think, this is a huge opportunity to make a big difference. And so what we're about, KK and I, and the Psych Rights Advisors, PAIMI Advisory Council Empowerment Project, is basically to recruit good people to get on these PAMI councils. And then Psych Rights is prepared to back people up with, kind of the force of having, a lawyer letter. And also, I'm prepared to basically meet with anybody and talk about this stuff. So I'd be happy to meet with advisory councils. I'd be happy to meet with individual members of councils. I'm happy to meet with people who are thinking about joining them. Groups of
Jim, can I
people.
clarify why? I want to just clarify a little bit why. It's because we've had, as PAMI council members, so much pushback on exactly where to exercise and the interpretation. And so, just as we were going through the act, and Jim said, "Look, this means jointly. This means jointly." And often PAMI members are told where their place is, and it became a very, let's say, tokened seat. So this is really empowering and equipping the members to speak up and speak out, and for Jim to come alongside and say, "Hey," to another group of attorneys, these individuals need to be heard, and this is exactly how it reads, the PAMI Act reads. So they need to fulfill their role is a really powerful thing. It's so powerful that I can share this year alone in the state I currently am in, that it was PAMI Council that was able to get testimonies into a on a bill that was going to be a forced community treatment bill, and it was going to expand like the care court model, and it had a very large criteria catchment. And it was we led the charge in submitting testimony, in doing interviews, but we wouldn't have known if we were not connected within the actual P&A system to watch for those bills, to alert our fellow grassroots advocates to get those testimonies in. And I take a lot of pride in that because NAMI really believed it was going to pass no problem, hands down. But if I was the sleeping PAMI council, right? Just like we said, wake up the gorilla. We came out and we attacked and we got that knocked down for now. It'll come back, I'm sure. But there is real power in this. So that's where we would love to meet with anybody that would like to apply. We'll support them in applying because some individuals have had problems with even getting their application submitted through to the PAMI councils because of different reasons, if you're too loud or, so we really want to empower the PAMI councils to provide the full purpose they were intended for under the act.
Yeah, and so we're having like this general meeting on November 20th at 6:30 p.m. Eastern Time. And everybody's welcome. I mean, I think after that, we've had some listening sessions which were designed to be safe spaces. So, we require approval and all this, but this is a general meeting, informational meeting, and kind of strategizing meeting. You do have to register. And if you just go to psychrights.org, there's a link on the left to this Advisory Council Empowerment Project, and it'll have the link there. Again, it's also in this PowerPoint is in the chat. And then I think after that we'll have again some meetings where we can be more guaranteed that it's a safe space. I mean, and this has been a big issue because people have really been attacked, for trying to assert their rights and really they've been tried to be suppressed. And again, this is where the psych rights backup can come in. So we're prepared to write a letter, signed by a lawyer and support people. I mean, this is so important. So
it is because, Jim, we come across that people are not even aware of the protection and advocacy system in their states. They're not even aware of it. So that's a big part of this, right? So even just educating that there are those systems in place and that the PAMI councils are there for that exact reason is almost been illuminating. So we would love for anybody that has interest in really elevating that life experience voice, professional insight that has human rights based perspective, right? To join and really shift it from a NAMI mommy perspective, which has kind of been some of the big issues, and really get the activation of what the intended purpose was for authentic, first-hand lived experience voice to really reach out to, connect those dots on the policy side and the advocacy side.
So that's great. I mean, absolutely. I mean, we think this is really important and a huge opportunity.